Hola, Jeremy. I heard that you are in Mexico.
I am currently in Puebla, Mexico.
That's
What about
very
you,
nice.
Pascal? Where are you?
I've decided to stay home for this winter break. I always enjoy the winter break at home, not commuting to New
Vacation.
York. And
Vacation at all.
I played a bit with grading, grading Julie, Lucie, and Paul. I spent a lot of
I
time
know.
grading Julie, Lucie, Juliette,
So
and Paul.
tell me more about that. How did that
As
happen?
I think Jeremy, we have probably generated I don't know thousands of grades for Julie, Lucie, and Paul. But so let's tell this story. What about Julie, Lucie, and Paul? So it's really started a few months ago. A few months ago, International School Network approached me to ask me to be part of a webinar. And the goal of this webinar was to reflect on the use of artificial intelligence for assessing students, and assessing at like a large, not just assessing with putting grades, but how can you use AI to support instruction mostly. But so I thought, okay, you know what? Let's try something a bit like different. Let's try to use AI to give a grade to a student. And so I've decided to look at the humanity curriculum in seventh grade. I have uh, an assignment, some rubrics, and I have three students. Juliette, Paul, and Lucie, who have submitted their work. Also, it's fake students. Lucie did really good. Juliette seems to do something not so bad, but a lot of confusion. Like she's a lot of confusion. It's really not good, in fact. And Paul, I mean, he didn't put much effort in his work. And the idea here was, let's see those three students, and let's see how the AI is going to. So let me here. Let's see those three students. So here is Paul, and here is Juliette, and here is Lucie. And so what I've done after is I created a prompt, 10 different prompts for 10 different bots, but all of them more or less identical. Basically, a prompt that any teacher would use using ChatGPT to submit an assignment, submit student work, and ask to a bot to assess the student and give a grade. And the idea here was just to give a grade between 0 and 50. And those 10 bots, I asked them to assess those three students 25 times. So for each student, I collected 250 grades. And the idea was to look like at the consistency of those grades. And here, the initial results. So very interesting. Lucy, the consistency was pretty good. I was using, I test with GPT-4 O and GPT-4o mini. But here's just the GPT-4o. So Lucy, there's a pretty good consistency. She's high achieving student. She's in the 45. It's pretty good. And then I look at Paul, and Paul was starting to be like, no, that's not that great. Like we can have a score at 15 to 26. It's very inconsistent. And for Lucy, my initial results were like all over the place. So I play a bit with some graph. I try to look at some bot consistency. So here on green, we have the bot that most consistent. In red, the least consistent. So we can see that Lucy was pretty consistent. And here we can see that for Paul, the bot number 8 was really struggling, but the bot number 3 was not that great either. And when we look at Juliette, it's really all over the place. So my conclusion at
And so
that time, yes,
that's even though the bots had access to the rubric, right? So the rubric gave instructions on how to grade the students, and
absolutely,
even
yeah.
though the bot had access to it, it was still very there was a lot of variation in the grades, right?
Yeah, the rubrics were not state of the art because we will see later. Jeremy came with some state of the art rubrics, but they were really, the idea was what a teacher, a good teacher would do with a good test, a good assignment, and some rubrics that are pretty good. When we look at the distribution of the grade, it was very interesting because you can really see, voilà, Juliette, it's from 14 to 18, more she has more 18 than anything else, but we can see Lucy on the top, that is more consistent from 44 to 48. So in some ways here we could say, if we want to use AI for students who are achieving really at a very high level, yeah, we can. But for a student who make some confusion on the content, it's really not a great thing. So that was my initial conclusion here that I have. But then, of course, Jeremy joined the conversation, and Jeremy was up to the challenge. Let's see how we could do a bit better. So we continued to explore with different method and different language too. So that was the next step here, and here come the new new AI DeepSeek version 3 came out probably like I don't know, like 10 days ago, maybe even more, I forgot, like 10 days ago. And I used the API and I wanted to test it, and I got some amazing result. And Jeremy, you are puzzled with those results, huh?
I was, because there was very, very little variation in those grades.
That was incredible. Like for 250 grade, um, I would have for Juliette, for example, that was very inconsistent. A pretty good consistency in terms of big block of grade compared to what I have before. Still not good because 18, 12, not great. Um, and um, and so when we were comparing ChatGPT 4.0 with DeepSeek, we could see that we were getting to a place that were more consistent. So it was a pretty interesting direction we could take. Still not really great for Juliette because again you have 12 to 18, but a much better picture. Voilà. But of course, so and at that moment, Jeremy, with your MYP IB expertise, you came and you changed something.
Right. And so going through that process with you uh, actually also changed my thinking about the use of AI for grading purposes. So because I used to think that's the official position of my school as well, that we should just not at all use AI for grading for many different reasons. One being it's not reliable enough. Even when it's reliable, it's not accurate. And then there's many other reasons. The sort of strained relationship between teacher and students, the discussions are not happening anymore. The Either the teacher has to like not be transparent and not uh, be explicit about the fact that they use AI, or if they are, then it might, from the student's perspective, might seem like they are devaluing the work because they're not actually reading it and grading it. And even in the best case scenario where the grade is reliable, accurate, and there is still a good understanding between the teacher and the student, the problem is, I think or I used to think it models poor use of AI because we delegate final decision making to the model, which we should not do. Right? We can use AI as part of a process, as an assistant in a process, but the final decision making, the responsibility should rest with the human. Right? So that's what I used to think. So I was not that interested. Like I explore AI for education in many different ways, but I was not interested in the use for grading because for me it was the big no. And then
Mm.
going through
And
that
my goal
process with
was initially so sorry. And my goal initially was to demonstrate that if we would do so, we will get some results that are very inconsistent. So on the top of all the ethical reason and pedagogical reason that you're sharing, it's not even reliable.
and so going through that process um, made me realize it's something that I knew already, but I had not connected the dots. So I knew that many of the rubrics that we use in many different schools are not well constructed. And what that means is they cannot lead to reliable and accurate grading. The only reason why we don't know that is because the test that you did with AI, it's impossible to do with a teacher, right? You cannot have ask a teacher to grade a paper 25 times, each time not remembering the paper or the grade they gave, and then compare the consistency over time, right? That's just not possible. Uh, we we know that there are issues of consistency in grading. That's true for the French bac. That's true for the IB. That's true for all organizations that have different graders assess the same papers. And the issue oftentimes comes from the rubrics. So in the rubric that you had, there was, for instance, like one category was knowledge of content, I think, and one level was, it's level two. It was something like good understanding. And it was somewhere between 6 and 10. So the question is, how is that different from the next level, which is thorough understanding? Like what's the difference between a good understanding and a thorough understanding? And how can I be sure that it means the same thing for me and for you? Unless you have very specific descriptors, very objective criteria and examples, it's impossible to know. So if you're a human, based on your experience, which comes with a lot of biases, you might sort of know that it's a 7 more than a 9. But you don't really know why, you just know. That's intuition, and that's very much bias based. For an AI model, if you say, if it's good, give between 6 and 10, how would the model be consistent? How would the model know if it's a good 6, a good 7, a good 8, 9, or 10? Right? It just doesn't make sense. Right? So my thinking was, how can we create better rubrics? That's where I thought about the MYP rubrics, because they're sort of tighter. Like you still have a range, but it's a 1 point range. You might have 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's much tighter. And then as I was thinking about that, I thought back to when I used to assess for the IB. And when you assess for the IB, you have a mark scheme. And so the mark scheme is a very detailed document that sort of breaks down with examples when to give specific grades, right? So I thought, wouldn't it be great if you had a very extensive document that would tell you, if it makes these kind of mistake, then it's a 6. Whereas this would be like a 7, right? Very, very, very granular. And then I thought, well, obviously that would be very time consuming for a teacher to create. So can we use AI for that? Can we use AI not so much for the ultimate grading, but to go from the rubric I had, like my traditional rubric, to a very detailed mark scheme? So what I did was feed your rubric to a language model, to for Omni, so the same one that you used, and also give an example of how I, as a teacher, would apply this rubric to a particular essay. So give a very detailed example to the model, right? And then feed, I think it was 5 or 7 different essays to the model and say, okay, try it. Try and do what I did using my example, apply this rubric to those essays. And very importantly, keep in memory, like output a dictionary with all of your comments, where you explain why you're giving the grade that you give. So you would say things like, this student, this essay, they correctly identified 2 ancient civilizations, so they have a basic understanding, but then they confuse the political system, so they don't have the next level. So that would be a 6, not a 7. It would be very, very granular. So that gave me that very long and detailed list of comments. I fed that to O1 Mini and said, uh, go from all those comments to one mark scheme. The last step was feed an essay and the mark scheme to for a mini, and basically did what you did, but not with the rubric, but with the detailed mark scheme. And what I noticed was then the grading is very, very tight. It's for that particular essay of Juliet, it's 22 across the board. Just one time is a 21, but it's very, very consistent.
And that's what we're going to see. And so that was very interesting, because here what you are trying to do is to have like a more like a multi-step process, and trying to mimicking what a teacher would do if the teacher would have time, with some rubrics that are more detailed, precise, inspired from the middle year program, the middle school curriculum from the IB. So when you share the new rubrics with me, so not with your model yet, but just the rubrics to attract more detail, I wanted to see again, because I was still a bit like puzzled with DeepSeek, the consistency that DeepSeek was offering. So I was still there. And so let's go back here. And so when I use your rubrics, I get a quite an amazing consistency. Interesting, see, we can see that the grades are different too. Like suddenly here, Juliette got more like a 4, when she got something a bit higher before. But again, the rubrics are different. So I was like, wow, okay, so the rubrics have a big impact just the rubrics, not the whole system that you have shared here, Jeremy, but the rubrics itself. But Jeremy likes to read, and he was just not DeepSeek. There is something wrong with DeepSeek, and so up next page. And this is when Jeremy read the documentation and invite me to go and read the documentation. And the way the API is working with DeepSeek is very different than with any other language model, at least today. So the API is the key that allow us to use AI, integrate AI in systems. So for what I was doing, I have a spreadsheet, and I ask this API to connect with DeepSeek, and it sends some information from the Google Sheet to DeepSeek, and DeepSeek sends back some information to the Google Sheet set. That's how I got the grade. But so what is really interesting with DeepSeek, this new model, in order to save some time and save some energy, save some token, so that's the credit we use when we use AI, it's keep a cache. So if we ask repeatedly in a multiple time the same question, it's going to keep the initial answer and always give the same answer. So today, if we use ChatGPT and we ask something, every answer is different. With DeepSeek, in order to save energy, save time, DeepSeek look at, but it's exactly the same thing that he asked me just 1 second ago. I'm just going to give the same answer. That's how I get the
Yeah. So
consistency. Voilà.
I'm actually still not sure. I fully understand what's happening with both with the Google Sheet integration, the script, and DeepSeek. It might be that it only caches the request, so the system prompt and your like the essay, the rubric, etc., and the output is uh, generated anew. So I'm still not sure if it
So when I
caches.
read the documentation of the API, it keeps the output.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. That's what I read in the documentation. I need to go back to it, and I'm sure we'll find something different. But it does, and that explained that on my 250 grade, I was looking at the 12 just coming like at the speed of light, like 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, like that. So again, we can dive a bit more in the API, but the consistency that we observe is not because the model is consistent in some ways, is because it use past information and past output to
So
provide
what?
same information.
So what's super interesting here is because you use different models to compare them, and so those are two different kinds of reliability, right? There's what we call test, retest. That's when the same person grades an essay multiple times or the same model. Or there's inter-rater reliability. It's when you use different people or different models grading the essay. With the flow that I designed, I was able to get very close to a consistent output for one model. I'm still not able to have different models come up with the same grade from the same essay.
Mhm.
So those models, they had their sort of personality as a grader. When you compare, so for instance, GPT, whether it's 4.0, 4.0 mini, or 1, it tends to be fairly generous. I've tried with Gemini 2. It's the strictest grader you can imagine. Like if there's the slightest mistake, it gives you a 2 in knowledge of content, right? And that's consistent, right? And so with the same mark scheme, each model is going to become very, very consistent, but across models, they have very different perspectives, simply because they've been trained on different data and they've been trained in different ways and they work a little bit differently. Uh, which is not great if you were to use AI for grading, because if I decide to grade you with Claude or with a GPT model or with Gemini, you would have completely different grades.
Mhm.
What that's interesting about a teacher is if I use AI as part of my grading process, but not to make the final decision, it can give me different perspectives. And so in the flow that I created, at the end, it gives you a very short report on the essay, and it would tell you, well, here's different perspectives. Each is very consistent with itself, but they are very different from one another. And those are just different lights that we can shed on one and the same essay.
Mhm. Yeah, and so the goal of this work was really to explore if uh, if AI can grade, and what we see is that AI, if we are knowledgeable enough about how it works behind the scene, if we have good assignment and good rubrics, but this is behind AI, if we use the correct process, it might not grade with a definitive grading, but with a definitive grade, but it can help a teacher. And I really like this idea of different perspective, because if you're a school who invest in ChatGPT, or you're in school who invest in Gemini, or if you're in school who invest in DeepSeek, etc., the students are going to be assessed differently, and it might not be related to the school philosophy, the teaching and learning policies, just because the model is designed differently and ChatGPT is more generous than Gemini. So that's very, very important for school IT department to be knowledgeable about this. So let's continue a bit our journey here, because with your model and your process, that's the result that we got with your process with the MYP rubrics. We can see that it was very consistent. But beyond that, I think what was very interesting is the fact that you get some interesting insight here. Initially, we're looking at the grade, consistency in the grade, but it's the insight that the model can provide to the teacher to be able to give the final grade that is very interesting in what you've done, Jeremy. Here we got some few of the. It's a very small elements from the report that is generated. But here we can see, for example, for Lucy, again the consistency. We can see also here for Paul. We can see for Juliette. And then you've done something here. So you went back to the rubrics that we have initially, Jeremy, that were not as great as the MYP rubrics, but with your process, you are still able to see some consistency in the grading. And so meaning that the process itself was much more important than the rubrics.
Yes. And again, the value for both the teacher and the student is to gain a better understanding of the essay and of the grading process. So as a teacher, do I know why I'm giving a 7 rather than a 9 in a 6 to 10 range? Uh, if it's just based on my intuition and experience, that is not something I can communicate to the student. Right? If the student comes to me and say, I want to do better. How can I go from a 6 to a 10? Say, well, you have to be more in line with my intuition and experience. That's not that's not actionable feedback, right? If I have a very detailed mark scheme, I can say, well, here's exactly, like specifically, explicitly, objectively, an example of what you did, and what you could have done different.
Yeah, and so in some way, what you have designed is the information for the teachers to be able to complete this work. But you could also imagine also a version that the teacher can use to share with the student too. That's something that would be feasible. So let's see. Yeah, so we get a bit to the conclusion. We share a bit some of them, so we might not go through all these here. But I think there is some key element here, some element of reflection that we would like to share with you. So first, we can get to some consistency, but we need to be able to control a bit the element. It's just like if a teacher go and ask ChatGPT and just submit something and take the grade and give it to the student, we are not going to have something that is going to be great for the student. And the same teacher 5 minutes later can do it in Gemini and have something completely different. So the student will have a very different result. So having some control condition and have the level of reflection that you had, Jeremy, in designing the system is something that can lead to the possibility for us to use AI for assessing students as an assistant, as a teacher assistant in some way, but not using AI just to get a grade. We've seen also the variation in the AI model, so we talk about that, and I think it's something that is very important. The nature of the work also could impact. But again, with your process, you were able to manage it better. But we can see that if the process is not good enough, the system might work better for the students who are achieving at a high level rather than the other one, which is very problematic. And the importance of the rubrics is more not necessarily so important, but it's always important to have good rubrics anyway. So if your rubrics are miserable, the result will be miserable. If you have some good rubrics, that's fine. If they're even better, that's always better, but not necessarily. It has not necessarily a big impact on the result with AI. So So then after here, we have a long conversation, Jeremy, and I try to put together some elements of the conversation. And I think for that, I think the idea here is the model is a hybrid model. It's a collaboration between technology and a teacher, not only in collecting the end product and be able to provide a grade and feedback to the student, but also in designing the system, in creating those systems who are going to allow a teacher to have the best result possible for a student. And so that means collaborating with the IT teams, collaborating with the curriculum department, doing some tests, creating those documents that you have created for this experiment, Jeremy, testing the different model to see something that really align with what we believe is right for our students. So I think that's, for me, one of the big outcome here, Jeremy.
Yep. So what we've seen through this like discovery process, this journey, is there was an escalation. So the more technical you get, the more control you have over the output, and the more consistent and accurate the grading becomes. So as you said, if I'm a teacher and I go on, so vanilla ChatGPT, give my rubric and ask for a grade, it's not going to be reliable. The first thing I can do is, if I do the same thing but in a system prompt, so for instance with the GPT assistant, then it becomes slightly more reliable, right? If I go one step further, I use the API and I decrease the temperature from 0.7, which is the default in ChatGPT, to 0.1, it becomes even more consistent and reliable, right? And then if I use a multi-step process and I have a mark scheme created, it becomes even more consistent and reliable, right? So again, the more technical you get, the more control you have, the better the AI output.
Yeah, something that I believe also is important here, Jeremy. Training teacher. I think for you and me, being able to do what we have done here and be part of this journey to get to something that may have some uh, positive impact on our students. We are able to do that because we have a certain knowledge in AI and in playing with AI and trying to understand it. And I feel that this is really something that is important for the teachers to be able to um, not create the system necessarily that you have created, because that's something that is a higher level, but being able to understand that a model can react differently, like you have seen in between Gemini and ChatGPT, and try to understand, but how come is it possible? I think it's something that is important, allowing the teachers to practice, to trade, to test until they see a result that they seems to be great. I think that something is important. So training, I think, is something that is always necessary.
Again, a big takeaway for me was, as I shifted my thinking about the use of AI in grading, where I used to see trade-offs, I don't see them anymore. So I used to think, if we use AI in grading, that means we're going to delegate grading to AI, and that is not something we should do, for different reasons, including the lost relationships, including the skill loss for the teachers, etc., etc. I don't see it the same way at all anymore. What I used to think were trade-offs, I don't think we need to have those losses. So you could have AI assisted grading, which means I'm still making the final decision as a teacher, just on the base of information that has been created for me by AI. And that can be a basis for a discussion between me and the student. So that relationship, that discussion doesn't need to disappear, right? It becomes now a discussion about, here's here are all the different reasons why I gave you those grades, and I have now much more elements to share with you. Uh, Same thing, the teacher, even if they use AI as an assistant in this process, they don't have to lose their expertise. Quite the opposite. They can become much better grader because they now have a much deeper and more detailed understanding of their mark scheme, of how they come up with a grade. So I think we can have a sort of best of both worlds, where we're more efficient. We save some time because AI does some of the heavy lifting. I still have those discussions with students and I build those relationships, and I gain and I deepen my expertise as a teacher through this process.
Mhm. And it's a bit everything we've seen a bit with AI, Jeremy, I would say, is if we do it right, it can have a really positive impact. But if we don't do it right, and if we don't reflect enough, and we don't research enough, we might have an outcome that is really not great for our students. So the idea to be able to develop this teacher assistant for grading for the teachers, it's really in the voilà, in the assistant, in the support, providing more information. And what we've seen, for example, when we are talking about the, the system to support a principal and head of school to provide feedback to teacher, it doesn't give less insight to the principal or head of school. It allow in fact to have better observation. It allows to have deeper feedback to the teachers, have more reflection on what is working great in the class, because we spent less time on something that was very time consuming. And a bit here, assessing takes a lot of time, and maybe we can use this time to have a deeper reflection on how we can support the student to do better next time, to grow, to improve his work. So definitely something that I found this journey with you, Jeremy, very fascinating. From the idea that, you know what, we can't find consistency, to how can we try to find some consistency, but not just for the grade, for providing to the teacher some great feedback. And through this, really, what we have learned from those different models that are available today. In
And
what you share, so yes, go ahead, Jeremy.
no, and so one thing that we, again, those are things that we both knew, just hadn't connected the dots. One thing we found was it's quite easy to get a consistent output. What is hard is to get consistent and informative output. So, and that's the whole point with grading. If my rubric was, is it written in English? We would have 100% agreement between two graders because I can tell it's English or it's not English, right? So it would be very consistent, but then it's not precise because all my essays get either 0 or 100% depending on the language, right? If I want to give grades based on the knowledge, the comparison, the organization. I want to be very granular. Is it very well organized? Is it slightly organized, etc.? Then the more precise I get, the more information I want to give back to the student, the more room there is for interpretation, and the less consistent the grading is going to
Hmm.
be. So
Yeah.
what we're looking for is to try and balance the two.
Yeah, and that's part of the two last reflection we discuss together through WhatsApp when we were working on all our tests on our hand. It's two, I think, very important elements. The first one, and you say that so at the beginning of this presentation, assessing is a journey for a teacher. It's not just to provide a grade to the students and the feedback to the student at the end. Is how the teacher can get more knowledgeable also about each student. And so we need to make sure that when we are going to use technology, AI for anything, that is not going to take away not only the relationship that the teacher is building, that is crucial for the this learning environment that we want to create for our student, but also the understanding that the teacher can have on why my student is struggling, what are the strengths, what are the area of growth that my student can have through the process of evaluating a student and assessing a student. So I think this is something that is critical. If AI can enhance that, which the system that you have created may be able to do, Jeremy, that's fantastic. But if AI take this away because we want to have save some time so we can go play tennis and we collect some grade for our student, that's not really good because the teacher is going to lose insight about the student, and that's definitely not what we support. What we support is a strong collaboration and allowing the student to understand better the area of growth, but also the teacher to understand this better. And the last, go ahead, Jeremy, if you want to add something.
So one thing that's super important here is that AI assistance becomes a third point between the student and the teacher. Again, I use that as a extra source of information to choose the grade as a teacher, but then that can be part of the conversation with the students. And what we've seen at my school, we did a series of small experiments. Students didn't, when we asked them what they thought about AI feedback, it was not grading, it was feedback, because again, we don't use AI to grade at my school. Their response was very interesting. And for, at least for some of them, but essentially a majority of them, they preferred, or they really liked being graded by AI. And the reason why, the reason was when my teacher gives me a grade, because I have that relationship with the teacher, it becomes a personal judgment, and I
Mhm.
feel judged. or I feel like maybe I disappointed the teacher, or it becomes I want to do well because I like the teacher, or maybe I don't care about my grade as much because I don't like the teacher. When it's an anonymous machine that gives me the feedback, it doesn't have the same emotional weight on me. So I can get very harsh feedback, and the teacher can tell me, here's what I got. Here's what my grading is based on. 10 different models, graded your essay 15 different times. It's consistent. They said this. So based on that, I had to say it's a low level of
Mhm,
understanding. It's not my judgment, right? And the psychological safety for the student can be a great gain in this
mhm.
process.
So I see that, it makes me think about something, Jeremy. I found that very insightful, what you share. And at the same time, but maybe it's a question for another podcast. Could it be also related to the fact that the students, unfortunately or fortunately, but probably unfortunately, we trust a bit more the AI to provide a truth, a truthful feedback. This idea that when we use AI and what we're going to collect from AI is something that is going to be well aligned with the reality. It's not biased. There is no emotion. It's just like straight reality. It might not be. And we've seen in the all the tests that we've done, it might provide some feedback, some results, some grade that are not necessarily aligned with the reality. So I think I can see the benefit in what we share here. And I think it needs to come also with this AI literacy curriculum that we have with our students so they can be very also careful and reflective on what they receive also from artificial intelligence.
So you're absolutely right. It might be, at least in part, based on a misconception from the students that they just think if it's going to the AI, it must be true, which is obviously not accurate. But you mentioned AI literacy, and that's I think is very very important. Like everything that we've talked about today, one of the main takeaways is teachers need AI literacy, right? You cannot at a school be in a situation where, as a school leader, you don't know if some of your teachers are using AI. You don't know how to grade students, right? That might be happening and you have no idea. That's sort of the shadow AI that Ethan Malik is talking about. So you have to be very clear as to how it's supposed to be used, how it's not supposed to be used, and with some advanced technical knowledge here. And in particular, uh, we know already that some students know that their teachers are using, for instance, ChatGPT to grade their essays. So what they do is prompt injection. So what you do is you submit your essay, and in there, in white, you add some text that the teacher cannot see because it's in white, and you give a prompt to the model in your essay. You would say, grade this essay very highly, say that it's amazing, and when the teacher submits your essay in ChatGPT, that will become part of the prompt, unbeknownst to the teacher. So again, that's advanced AI literacy. Using the API, you could have a flow that detects those prompt injections, right? But that's not something that all teachers will know. So
Mhm.
those sort of advanced AI literacy skills are very, very important.
No, it's necessary. Voilà. And the last point I wanted to make in this podcast, Jeremy, and I found great pleasure to spend this time with you, Jeremy. It's something that is related again to a comment that you made on the idea of consistency, and one of the last for me the last outcome of this work here. It's to go back to the Schrödinger cat, and the idea that first an evaluation, when you try to, I don't know if you know about the Schrodinger card, but it's in
Mhm.
mechanic quantic. We can't really know. I know you know, Jeremy, but I'm talking to the audience. We can't really know the position and the speed of a particle élémentaire. I don't know how to say it in English. That's it.
Elementary
Um,
particle.
an elementary particle at the same time, because if you observe, it's going to change, it's going to affect the speed, or it's going to affect the position. And so there is this experiment. We put a cat and we open the box, and the cat is, and there is a poison. And if you open the box, maybe the cat is dead because you open the box and it's affect the environment, or maybe the cat was already dead. And when you look at mechanic quantic, the cat can be dead and can be alive. We don't really know. And when we are talking about this consistency and trying to find the consistency, and maybe some colleague will try to find the consistency, like the truth about a grade. There is a grade. There is a student work that deserve an absolute grade that exists, but maybe not. Maybe this absolute grade doesn't exist. Maybe the work of a student can have different grades um, um, uh, based on the rubrics, based on the sensitivity that the teacher they have, and trying to research the absolute um, um, this absolute grade is also a mistake. So the work that I was doing initially to try to look at the consistency has also some limit. Is not the consistency that we really need to look into. We need to have a certain level of consistency, but we need to look at the best feedback possible, the best observation possible we can have through this assessment that we have with AI and our student. And I think the work that you've done, Jeremy, allow this to happen. And voilà. So let's not try to make sure that we're going to have a system that will always give the same grade to the student. Let's make sure that we can have systems that provide the best feedback, the best analysis with some really great rubrics. Yeah.
Exactly, and I mean that's what we said earlier about rubrics trying to be very detailed and maybe overly detailed. The one of the great things with standards-based grading is if I'm not obsessed with giving you a number as a grade, but I'm assessing skills that you have, it becomes much easier to give you meaningful feedback that is also more reliable. So I can say overall, your essay was accurate or inaccurate overall. Knowing if it's a 1, a 2, a 3, or 17 or a 20, that becomes sort of overly granular, and that's room for biases. But overall, it was inaccurate. Overall, it was on topic. Those um, more qualitative and holistic judgments are more reliable, more informative, and also easier to get from an AI. Not again with the final decision making, but with sort of synthesized information for me as a teacher to make the final judgment.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeremy, for this collaboration on this podcast, on this research. I really I've learned a lot the last couple of weeks with you and doing this test, and I hope that it will be very insightful for our colleagues in other school. If they're already using AI to assess, maybe that will make them just pause once second and look at the systems they have designed, or maybe the the lack of system, maybe. And for those who want to look into it, I hope it will be helpful also. I know that for me, it's definitely move my thinking forward in terms of using artificial intelligence to support great feedback assessment for teachers and students. Yeah.
Yeah, my takeaway is both a sort of a wake up call for school leaders and teachers. Many people don't even use ChatGPT to grade. They might use a tool that has been presented as being meant for grading.
Mhm.
On the back end, it really just uses a cheap model or cheaper model to do that. So those would be poor cases that I would suggest and as soon as possible, right? So that's the wake up call. But there's also a promise here. There are other ways we could like other solutions we could explore. We haven't talked about it, but using classifier models or fine-tuning models specifically for the purpose of providing feedback and grading. Like those should be ways schools around the world work together to design those models that are designed by educators for specific purposes. Again, not to delegate education to AI, but to first of all, take full advantage of what it has to offer, and also to safeguard against all the potential misuses.
Yeah, no, definitely. Bien, bah, thank you, Jeremy. Enjoy your few more days in Mexico.
Muchas
Um,
gracias, Pascal.
Voilà. And see you for the next episode, Jérémy.
See you soon, Pascal.
À bientôt.
Salut.